It is a truth universally acknowledged that a young lady of modest means and no immediate fortune must depend, in some measure, on the kindness of her relations. Miss Amelia Lacey, recently orphaned, found herself in such a position when she was sent to reside with her uncle and aunt, Mr. and Mrs. Fairchild, at their estate in Somerset. Though Mr. Fairchild was of a mild and amiable nature, his wife possessed a disposition most unyielding, particularly when it came to matters of propriety and inheritance. She had but one daughter, Miss Juliana Fairchild, whom she had long determined should make an advantageous match with their wealthy neighbor, Mr. Edward Ashford. The young man had inherited his father's estate, Ravensbrook Park, and was considered the most eligible bachelor in the county. It so happened that Amelia, Juliana, and Edward had spent their childhood in one another's company, though Mrs. Fairchild had always regarded her niece as an unfortunate, inconvenient burden. Thus, when Edward began to display a marked preference for Amelia over her own daughter, Mrs. Fairchild's displeasure knew no bounds. "My dear," she chided Juliana one morning, "it is quite obvious that Mr. Ashford finds your cousin diverting. You must not permit such nonsense. A man of his station requires a wife of consequence, not a penniless girl with no connections to recommend her." Juliana, though vain, was not unkind at heart. She had long known that Edward held Amelia in great esteem, and while she had once entertained hopes for herself, she could not bring herself to despise her cousin for capturing his affections. Amelia, for her part, was not so blind as to mistake Edward's attentions. He sought her out at every gathering, conversed with her at every opportunity, and though his manner was always proper, there was a warmth in his gaze that sent her heart into a flutter. Still, she dared not believe he could ever truly love her. It was on a quiet afternoon, as Amelia walked alone in the Fairchilds' rose garden, that her reverie was interrupted by Edward's arrival. He approached with an air of determined sincerity. "Miss Lacey," he said, his voice soft yet firm, "I can no longer remain silent. I love you. I have loved you from the moment I first beheld you, though I only lately understood the depth of my feelings." Amelia could scarcely breathe. "Mr. Ashford, you cannot mean it." "But I do," he insisted, taking her hand. "Say that you will be mine, and I shall ask for your hand this very evening." Before Amelia could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "You most certainly shall not?" Mrs. Fairchild had overheard all, and her wrath was swift. "You ungrateful girl! I will not have you disgrace this family. You will leave this house at once." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. She had no dowry, no relations to take her in, no prospects for the future. But before despair could take hold, Edward clasped her hands in his own. "If she must leave," he said resolutely, "then she shall not leave alone." Within a day, arrangements were made. Amelia, with Edward's unwavering devotion and the help of a trusted friend, eloped to Gretna Green, where they were married by special license. From that moment forward, Amelia was no longer an orphan with no fortune. She was Mrs. Ashford, the beloved mistress of Ravensbrook Park. With Edward at her side, she knew nothing but happiness, for their love had triumphed over the cruelest of obstacles. As for Mrs. Fairchild, she was left to lament her failed ambitions, while Juliana, relieved of her mother's schemes, found her own happiness in due course. Thus what began as misfortune became Amelia's greatest blessing, for in losing her home, she had found the greatest treasure of all, a love both enduring and true.